The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
At a certain point, this insanity needs to stop, and we all sort of need to realize what it is that's going on, which is that there is a Trump-Russia story. There's just too much here, and it goes beyond whether you specifically think there was criminal obstruction of justice, for example. What I'm talking about is a much more overarching theme, and I want to be really clear with respect to the defenses that sometimes people put up. It doesn't mean that Hillary was a good candidate. It doesn't mean that the Democratic National Committee didn't screw Bernie Sanders. It means only what it is. And to add to this growing list, the Trump administration is now refusing, just straight up saying they're not going to do it, refusing to enact new sanctions on Russia. Shocking, right? I'm truly shocked that Trump is not going to sanction the one country that he's avoided criticizing during the last 2 years, nor has he insulted the leaders of that country, which seems to be a trend for Trump in most parts of the world. These are the new sanctions that were voted on and enacted by Congress last year for both Russia's actions in Crimea and for Russian election meddling. And Donald Trump doesn't even believe that meddling took place, right? He just doesn't believe it. So it does sort of follow logically based on that harebrained internal logic that if he doesn't even believe that there was meddling, that he certainly wouldn't believe that Russia should be punished for meddling that he claims not to believe exists. But listen to how absurd this part is. The Trump administration is actually saying they don't need to do the sanctions because the threat of at some future point doing sanctions is enough of a deterrent to Russia. This is the same Trump administration that goes by the principles of hit 'em where it hurts, show 'em who's boss, law and order, we're tough, really tough, the toughest. But when it comes to Russia, they're saying, hey, you know, we don't need the actual punishment because just the threat of some possible punishment in the future is enough to get him to do what it is we want him to do. Burglars won't steal again, even if you don't punish them, because they know that if they do it again, they might actually get punished. Murderers don't need to actually be tried and imprisoned for the murders because the fear of a future indictment would keep them from ever murdering again. This is the logic of the Trump administration if you believe that that is a valid explanation for why Russia shouldn't be sanctioned.
And it's completely inconsistent, too, because after North Korea was developing their nuclear weapons capabilities and testing ballistic missiles, the Trump administration imposed new sanctions on North Korea, just saying that threatening them with sanctions was a deterrent wasn't an argument then, and it shouldn't be now.
They're only subscribing to this logic with Russian sanctions, because everywhere else they seem to say, well, yeah, maybe they want to do even more than sanctions, but sanctions are okay. It's always Russia, right? It's not Peru. It's not Papua New Guinea. It's not the Maldives. It's yet again Russia that gets the special treatment. Now, I want to prepare you for something else. There are two lines that you're going to hear more and more from Trumpists on this non-sanctioning of Russia. First will be, why don't you want better relations with Russia? Wouldn't it be good to have a better relationship with Russia? It's a red herring, okay? Of course, in any situation, we'd rather be friends with countries than be enemies with countries or have a hostile situation with countries. But Russia already did things that Congress determined there should be sanctions for, and now pulling out of thin air, well, let's just be friends. Everybody should be friends. Skip the punishment. That is a standard that these same Trumpists aren't applying to other countries. But number two, you're also hearing, and you often you hear it or read it in the trademark broken English that is the calling card of the Russian trolls on the internet, you hear sanctions don't work, they just hurt the people. That's perfectly legitimate to debate, right? And we can have a reasonable disagreement over sanctions as a tool. But to only choose to want to debate sanctions when it's to defend Trump not sanctioning Russia, then you've been co-opted. And in fact, speaking of these troll bots or Russian troll protesters, they're not all bots. They're everywhere online.
Yeah.
The same broken English that you see saying the FISA memo will destroy the Trump-Russia narrative any day now are the same folks coming out of the woodwork saying thank you to Donald Trump for bettering the relations between Russia and the U.S. They are everywhere. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying everyone who posts this stuff online is a Russian troll, but you can very clearly discern that this is a movement that exists online. We see it just on our own YouTube posts.
Yeah, and we covered it. There are like 30,000 Russian bots out there tweeting release the memo hashtag.
Release the memo has been a big thing. And I know people always say, but David, I'm not a Russian bot and I use the release the memo hashtag. We're not saying it's like all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. That is a hashtag and a post being used a lot by Russian trolls and troll bots, but that doesn't mean anyone using it is one of those. So now what? Well, we'll have a couple of Republicans like John McCain and Lindsey Graham who will say they're deeply disturbed about the lack of enacting sanctions, but they'll probably not really do anything about it. And then, of course, you'll see Donald Trump continue to just say, hey, listen, there was no collusion, period, but continue to try to displace, fire, or force the resignations of anyone who's looking into that. That's the path forward.
And of course, this isn't direct evidence of Trump-Russia collusion.
No,
Maybe it's not even circumstantial, but it's one of those things that doesn't pass the sniff test.
Absolutely.
And we've seen that time and time again. That's why we're having an investigation.
No question about it. So yet again, it's not Peru, it's not the Maldives, it's not Madagascar. It's always Russia that seems to get the preferential special treatment from Trump. Or Saudi Arabia, we've also seen, but for completely different reasons in a completely different area of sort of geopolitical circumstances. Another one bites the dust, by the way. Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who's been facing pressure from Trump for months now, has stepped down. In order to get his retirement with full benefits, he will stay on the FBI payroll, conveniently for him, until mid-March, but not as Deputy FBI Director. How that works exactly, I'm not sure, but it's working for him.
I think he has some sick days and personal days.
Ah, okay. Good for him. Trump has been treating McCabe terribly for a long time now. We've been talking about it. We now know that in the Oval Office meeting he had with McCabe after the firing of James Comey, Trump asked McCabe who he had voted for in 2016, which is an inappropriate question. Then, during a phone call, he told McCabe to ask his wife what it feels like to be a loser, since she had lost a political campaign shortly before that conversation took place. And then also recall that back in July, Donald Trump tweeted about Andrew McCabe, why didn't Attorney General Sessions replace acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe, a Comey friend who was in charge of Clinton investigation? McCabe has been in the FBI since 1996. He's worked under two Republican directors of the FBI, Robert Mueller, as well as James Comey. And naturally, after the announcement, the revelation that Andrew McCabe would be stepping down, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said Trump had nothing to do with this. The White House played no role in the resignation of Andrew McCabe, and she referred future questions to the FBI. Now, right away, minutes, seconds even after this news broke, you had committed Trumpists saying McCabe is stepping aside because the FISA memo, once it's released, is just going to crush him. And I kind of pretended to buy into that yesterday. I guess I was a little too convincing because I jokingly tweeted, I believe the deputy FBI director stepped down because he knew he'd be fired as soon as the contents of the memo were released. I also believe Donald Trump is 6'3" tall and weighs 239 pounds. And apparently a lot of people only read that first sentence and thought I was serious. And I was saying, oh yeah, the memo was going to lead to his firing, so he got out early.
You're trolling the trolls.
I'm trolling it, no question about it. So let's break this down into its component parts, since there's really a lot to think about here. First of all, did Donald Trump push Andrew McCabe out directly or indirectly? I don't know, but I would argue that it's not hugely relevant, that the firing of James Comey and the order to fire Robert Mueller and the pressure on Jeff Sessions to get rid of McCabe, if there's going to be a charge of obstruction, then I don't think we even need to figure out whether or not McCabe actually was pressured to step down by anyone in the Trump administration. I think it becomes secondary or even tertiary to an obstruction charge.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely possible that McCabe was just used to flying under the radar.
Sure.
And he didn't like being in the public spotlight. He didn't like his wife being in the public spotlight.
Absolutely,
and he just wanted to get out once he could.
Yes, so I think that discussion, while interesting, is not hugely relevant to any possible upcoming charges related to obstruction. Now, along those same lines, McCabe was 2 months from retirement one way or the other, and there was every expectation he was going to step down, resign, quit, retire in March anyway. The McCabe replacement is actually very interesting because FBI Director Christopher Wray has chosen David Bowditch, I'm not exactly sure how it's pronounced, to replace Andrew McCabe. And once again, Bowditch is the type that Republicans by profile should love. He's a former police officer. He was a sniper on SWAT teams. He was on the JTTF, the Joint Terrorism Task Force. He fought against gangs. He is the epitome of the law and order guy that Trump claims to love. But from everything I've read, Bowditch is arguably even worse for Trump than McCabe because from every indication, everything I've read so far, he's not going to take any of Trump's crap, period. So I think that this will be very interesting to see. And again, for that reason, and because obstruction charges could exist, they could materialize regardless of Trump's involvement or non-involvement in the resignation of McCabe, I don't think that's really the question. The question that I have is, can the Mueller investigation continue unencumbered? I think we can say it probably can, right? I think that in all likelihood, at this point, the Mueller investigation is continuing unencumbered. And you know, I have no emotional or ideological attachment to anything in particular coming out of that investigation. To be perfectly clear, even though there is this cottage industry of people, particularly on the internet, who want to talk about how I have predetermined that there was X, Y, or Z crime committed. From an ideological perspective, I don't care. What I want is a full and unencumbered investigation so that we can finally get a determination on that, and then we can all move on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, just get the facts out. None of these firings and, trying to obfuscate and
yes, that's
distract
exactly
from
what
the
I'm
issue.
saying. Exactly what I am saying. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and boy, do we have a good one for you today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Galim Kaudinov. Galim, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. And not only do we have Galim as a new David Pakman Show member, I want to send a major thank you to sustaining member of the day, Lanny Wilkerson, who signed up on August 4th of 2010. It might as well have been a different millennium, because it feels like it was just so long ago, and Lanny and so many of our other sustaining members. This is a big deal, a very, very big deal.
I think I was still in diapers back then.
I think you were, yeah. I mean, you were a teenager, but you were still in diapers.
Yeah, unfortunately,
and that's we'll talk about that on the bonus show. Not at all appropriate for the regular show. Sign up, join these great folks, join Lanny and Galim. We crack ourselves up sometimes at davidpakman.com/membership. Okay, the reason I'm talking about this every day, and Pat's getting frustrated with it, but we're going to persevere, is that we are dangerously close to hitting the number of patrons that we need in order to finalize production and release the 12 to 15 part Critical Thinking mini-series. The background on this is that we tied the production of a fantastic mini-series on critical thinking and argumentation and logical fallacies to hitting 2,100 patrons at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. This is a platform that if you visit the website, patreon.com/davidpakmanshow, you will very easily and clearly see that merely by hitting the orange button that says become a patron, you can add to the 2,057 patrons that we currently have. And the reason that the number 2,057 is so big is that when we reach 2,100 patrons, which is now only 43 patrons away, we will record, edit, and upload the multi-part critical thinking mini-series. Early last week, we had about 100 patrons to go. Late last week, we needed only 85. Yesterday, I told you that we needed 57. And today, I can tell you with peace and love that we need only 43 more patrons in order to hit that goal. We've already been working. I've previewed to you one of the pieces of the multi-part miniseries. I've also shown you, and I'm doing it again, that we have a really great animated introduction custom done by producer Noah Ferguson for each of the parts of this critical thinking miniseries. It is going to be really good, but I'm both titillated and concerned because February 1st is coming up. And unfortunately, what happens on the 1st of every month is that when Patreon goes to run everybody's pledges, some people's credit cards and debit cards have expired since the January pledge. Yeah. And so that number, which is currently 2,057, will get knocked down. Sadly, it'll probably get knocked down to around 2,000.
Yeah, I think we need to do like a telethon. Maybe you can live stream.
I might have to.
I'll provide the entertainment. I'll answer phone calls. Whatever we've got to do, I think.
Whatever we have to do, because that I am worried. I think it's really important that we do this by the end of January 31st. So if you've got even a single dollar to pledge, please go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show. We really just need 22 people today and 21 people tomorrow, or 21 today and 22 tomorrow, or 42 today and 1 tomorrow. Divide it up however it makes sense to you. 43 pledges, and we will be there, and it's going to be glorious.
Yeah, it's one of the best things that the David Pakman Show has ever produced.
That's right.
And that's mostly because I had pretty much nothing to do with it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exclusively, I would say. No, actually, I think it's going to be, it's just so different. We've never really done anything like it before. Pat seems shell-shocked over there by what's going on. But in any case, it's going to be great. That's what I can tell you. Let's do it, and don't make me call Pat's entire family and get them to make pledges. Okay, let's talk about Ted Cruz again. We've been talking about Ted Cruz a lot because back in mid-December, I told you, hey, you know what? Democrats should target Ted Cruz in 2018. It might be the perfect time to go after Ted Cruz's Senate seat, which is, of course, up for re-election in now something like 9 months. And then on January 25th, just a few days ago, last week, in fact, no, earlier this week, losing track of time here. It's so exciting. No, wait, the 25th was last week. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course it was. I got to get a calendar. I can't even keep track of the days.
We have David Pakman Show calendars.
I should. I know. I should put one up on the wall. Last week, Ted Cruz was leading Democratic challenger Beto O'Rourke by only 8 points. And with each passing week or two, the case for running hard against Ted Cruz's Senate re-election campaign gets even stronger. We've now learned that Beto O'Rourke has raised more money than Ted Cruz in a quarter for the second time. In the last quarter of 2017, Ted Cruz raised $1.9 million, while his challenger, Beto O'Rourke, raised $2.4 million, about $500,000 more than incumbent Ted Cruz. Now, the deficit that O'Rourke is still facing is that Ted Cruz in total has way more money. Ted Cruz has over $7 million. O'Rourke has about $4.5 million. But Beto O'Rourke can keep closing the gap if he can keep outraising Ted Cruz month after month. Now, as a reminder, Beto O'Rourke still hasn't even won his primary. Beto's primary is on March 6th. He will likely win, but we want to be sure of that before we move on into general election mode. Yes, the odds are against O'Rourke in Texas, but it's not impossible. The timing is arguably very good. But there is this problem that he needs to take the overall money lead more than likely, because in general, the candidate with more money is the candidate that wins. Name recognition continues to be a problem for Beto O'Rourke. In the end, there's going to be a lot of less enthusiastic voters who will vote, but they're probably just going to vote for whoever is the Republican on the ticket. Texas has more Republicans than Democrats. So in order to sort of push back against that, Beto needs to raise his name recognition, and that's an uphill battle. Yeah. I don't know exactly how you do that.
I think the name recognition is a big deal. I mean, if he was running against John Cornyn, the other Texas senator, I think he would have a better shot. But
Maybe so.
maybe they see Ted Cruz over in Texas as their national hero, right?
That's scary.
Who represents the state so well.
National hero born in Canada, of course, but national hero nonetheless. Yeah, Ted Cruz, on the one hand, it kind of makes me feel a little sick, but Pat might be right that he's seen sort of as a hero in Texas. At the same time, in reality, Ted Cruz is one of the most dangerous ideologues in the Senate, and it should be one of the highest priority takedown attempts. And he happens to not be hugely popular right now either. In a recent approval poll, Cruz had 19% strong approval and 19% somewhat approval, meaning that 38% total has any degree of approval of Ted Cruz. It's an uphill battle, but it's a good one, and I hope people in the audience will get involved.
Yeah, I think Beto O'Rourke would it would be wise if he made an argument that Ted Cruz is really only in it for himself. You know, he ran for president as a freshman senator.
Yep.
I guess Obama did that too, but Obama won.
That's the
Ted
difference.
Cruz is running for re-election now as a senator.
If you run for president as a freshman senator and win, then it's much harder to criticize you. If you do what Ted Cruz did and seem to be interested, like Trump, in self-aggrandizement and just fulfilling your greedy instincts, then it's not as good of a look, that's for sure. Hey, tonight is Donald Trump's first official State of the Union of his presidency, and I haven't been discussing it because mostly we'll discuss it tomorrow. There's not that much to talk about in advance other than the low standards that are being set, and I'll get to that in a moment. But there's an interesting side story that has developed because billionaire Tom Steyer has started buying ads during State of the Union coverage that are the ads are going to call for Donald Trump's impeachment. And this is, like much of what's going on during Donald Trump's presidency, not normal. Steyer has already spent $40 million campaigning against Donald Trump, and this includes billboards in Times Square. And he is going to be running these impeach Trump ads during coverage of the State of the Union. Of course, the State of the Union itself is broadcast commercial-free, but networks are doing coverage starting hours before and that will go for hours after, including during the Democratic response, which will be done by Joe Kennedy III. But the general message of these impeach Trump ads will be to just list things that Trump has done and say, how bad does it have to get before Congress is going to do something? And Steyer believes that Trump has already done enough to warrant impeachment, including, as he says, conspiring with Russia. So in some places, there are going to be ads calling for the impeachment of the president during coverage of that same president's State of the Union address. And on the other hand, and this is a true story, the Trump administration, the Trump reelection campaign actually, is offering donors who contribute at least $35 the opportunity to have their names flash on the screen on the Trump campaign website's broadcast of the State of the Union speech. Nice little idea, right? This is a text message that went out to people on some Trump list. Who knows what it is? And the text message said, it's Trump speaking, supposedly. The State of the Union speech is not about me. It's about you, which is why I will have the names of every supporter who contributes today broadcast during my speech on the official Donald J. Trump for President live stream. Enough of the fake news media. It's time for them to hear from the American people. And what's weird is even in these texts, there's still really strange capitalization, like fake news media. It's just like his tweets.
Yeah, live
How
stream.
weird is that? I'm almost wondering whether it's not Trump that does the weird capitalization. It's whoever is running a lot of the messaging, because it's hard to imagine Trump wrote out this text himself.
Well, someone else dictates his tweets, right?
Well, he dictates them. Someone else types them.
Someone else
is
types
what you
them,
mean. Transcribes or whatever.
Yeah.
It's all very, very strange. I say, why stop there? Take some of the logos of companies that have donated to Trump and put it right on the podium when Donald Trump is doing the State of the Union, sort of like NASCAR drivers and cars have their logos physically on there. Here's what you really need to be prepared for, okay? And this is the serious thing. We've talked about normalization. We've talked about hyper-normalization. What you need to be prepared for is that as a clear-thinking person, you might watch tonight and you'll see a Trump that is still clueless about foreign policy, clueless about economics, clueless about social issues. He has no idea what's going on, but he'll read a prepared speech and he might be able to go the 45 minutes without uttering a racial slur. And in comparison, it might start to seem like maybe he's not that out there. And you know that you're going to see the Trumpists in the spin room after the fact talk about how it's a new Trump. He was super presidential. And what you've got to remember is that the bar has been set so low that you don't want to be tricked into thinking that because he can go an hour sounding mildly coherent without saying most people coming from Mexico are rapists and criminals, right? Just because he can avoid that for an hour, don't be tricked by the normalization that's being attempted into believing, maybe he's not that bad. It's that bad.
It's definitely going to happen, too. If you remember after his first address to Congress, which isn't called the State of the Union, but it essentially is.
Yeah.
People were saying that that was the night that he became president.
Totally predictable. Be prepared for it. The committed right-wing Trumpists are going to come away thinking that he did great and he's fantastic and tremendous and Wharton and all of this stuff no matter what. But don't be lulled by the normalization that has started to take place into thinking that Trump is anything other than what he is, regardless of what he manages to read off of a teleprompter tonight. There will be no doubt discussion of the State of the Union address on our subreddit, which you can find and sign up for at davidpakman.com/reddit.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're continuing our conversation with Johann Hari. He is author of the book Lost Connections, Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and the Unexpected Solutions. So in part one, we really sort of focused on understanding, building a model of the causes of depression, which, as we talked about, have a biological component, they have a social component, they have sort of situational component. What I'd like to transition into is what works and what doesn't work. And in that context, certainly we would talk about pharmaceuticals, which have a pretty wide range of success and lack of success depending on the circumstances and the individuals that take them. So let's maybe start on solutions a little bit.
I think to understand the solutions, you've got to understand some of the specific causes. Everyone listening to this knows that they have natural physical needs, right? You've got to have food, shelter, water, clean air. If I took any of those things away from you, David, you'd be in trouble really fast. One of the things that connects 7 of the 9 causes of depression and anxiety that I could find scientific evidence for is there's equally strong evidence that we have natural psychological needs, right? You've got to feel you belong. You've got to feel your life has meaning and purpose. You've got to feel that you have a future. You can understand there's a range of psychological needs. And our culture is good at lots of things, but it's been getting less and less good at meeting some of these deep underlying psychological needs. I'll give you a very clear example of that and then a solution. So I noticed that lots of the people I know who are depressed and anxious, their depression and anxiety focuses on their work. So I started to look at what's the evidence about how people feel about their work. Gallup has done the most detailed research on this. They found 13% of us like our jobs. We look forward to them most of the time. 63% of people are what they called sleepwalking through their work. So you don't like it, you don't hate it. 24% of people hate their work. So you think about that. 87% of people don't like the thing they're doing most of the time. I was like, okay, what's going on here? Could that be affecting our emotional and mental health? I discovered an amazing Australian social scientist who'd done the best research on this in the 1970s, a guy called Michael Marmot, who I got to know. So I can tell you how if you want, but to give you the headline, he discovered the key factor, not the only one, but the key factor that causes depression at work, not just unhappiness. Depression actually even makes you more likely to have a stress-related heart attack. If you go to work and you feel you have no or little control, so you're just told what to do, you are significantly more likely to become depressed. And I think that's because we all have an innate need for meaning in our lives, right? And if you're controlled all the time, it disrupts your ability to create meaning. Now, that is a cause of depression. So I started thinking, well, what would an antidepressant for that look like? So I went to Baltimore, met an amazing person called Meredith Keogh. So Meredith, and I think this really connects with a lot of things you cover on your show so brilliantly, David. Meredith used to go to bed every Sunday night just sick with anxiety. She had an office job. It wasn't the worst office job in the world. She wasn't being bullied or harassed, but she just couldn't bear the thought this was going to be her life for 40 years. And one day with her husband, Josh, she did this quite bold thing. Josh had worked in bike stores since he was a teenager. And one day, it's insecure, controlled work, as you can imagine. One day with his friends, they were in the bike store and they were like, what does our boss actually do? They quite liked their boss. He wasn't a bad guy. But they thought, well, we fix all the bikes. They didn't like this experience of being bossed. So they decided to do an experiment. They opened a rival bike store. It's called Baltimore Bicycle Works. And it doesn't work like most workplaces. It's a democratic cooperative. They don't have a boss. They take all the decisions together, big decisions. They share out the good tasks and the bad tasks, so no one gets stuck with only the bad tasks. They obviously share the income. And this completely fits with Professor Marmot's findings. One of the things that was so fascinating to me is how many of them talked about having been depressed and anxious before and said they weren't depressed and anxious in this different environment. Now, it's important to say, it's not like they quit their jobs fixing bikes and went off to become Beyonce's backing singers, right? They fixed bikes before they fixed bikes now. What they changed was the thing that causes depression and anxiety, which is being controlled. Now, I would argue that is an antidepressant. And as Josh put it, and this is where I think it connects with so much of the work you do on corporations, there is no reason why any workplace should be structured in this depressogenic, controlled way. Every workplace could be a democratic workplace. It's only very recently that the modern corporation in its current form in human history came into existence. Imagine how many people you know who feel terrible at the moment, who would feel differently if they knew that tomorrow they were going into a workplace that they controlled with their colleagues, where they could use their creativity and set the priorities for the workplace, where if there has to be a boss, he's elected and accountable to them. That's a completely different way of living. Now, I think a lot of that 87% of people in our culture who dread or don't like the thing they're doing most of the time would start to feel differently about it.
So in terms of, that's a very interesting sort of situational antidepressant. As far as the more traditional so-called treatments, what do you think is the role of antidepressants, typically the SSRI family, not for everybody, but for some, short-term or long-term psychotherapy? And of course, there's different modalities of that, and we could sort of assess the value of one versus another in treating depression. What's your sense of the different sort of typical treatments that are out there?
One of the things that most helped me to think differently about this, I was learning intellectually about these 9 causes of depression and anxiety, and I was kind of taking it on board, and it really kind of emotionally locked into place for me when I met this amazing South African psychiatrist called Derek Summerfield. And Derek happened to be in Cambodia when chemical antidepressants were first introduced there. And the doctors there, the Cambodian doctors, didn't know what they were, right? So Derek explained. And they said, oh, we don't need them. We've already got antidepressants. And he said, what do you mean? He thought they were going to talk about like a herbal remedy. They told him a story. There was a farmer in their community who one day had stood on a landmine left over from the American invasion of Southeast Asia, and his leg had been blown off. And they gave him an artificial limb, and he went back to work in the rice fields. But apparently it's very painful to work with an artificial limb in water. I imagine it was quite traumatic because he's back in the fields where he'd been blown up. He starts to cry all day, classic depression. And they said to Derek, well, we gave him an antidepressant. He said, what did you do? They said, well, they explained they went and sat with him. They listened to his problems. They realized that his pain made sense. It wasn't a pathology. And they figured, well, if we bought him a cow, he could become a dairy farmer. And, then he wouldn't have to be in this situation. So they bought him a cow, and within a few weeks, he stopped crying and his depression went away. They said to Derek, so you see, doctor, that cow was an antidepressant. So I looked at lots of places all over the world where they had tried to pick up these insights. And I found that there's certainly a place for chemical antidepressants. 1.8 points on the Hamilton scale is not 0 points on the Hamilton scale. I well understand why lots of people choose that option and why it outweighs some of the really significant side effects for a lot of people. Therapy is great. I've had a therapist for 12 years. I'm strongly in favor of it. I have a chapter about it in the book. But the most impressive responses that I found were ones that built on this insight about not trying to blunt the symptoms, but trying to deal with the causes. I'll give you one more quick example. There's a doctor in East London, one of the heroes of my book Lost Connections, called Sam Everington. So Sam is a doctor in a poor part of East London, actually where I lived for a long time, although sadly he was never my doctor. And Sam was really uncomfortable because lots of people would come to him who were depressed and anxious, and he would listen to their lives and he'd think, well, of course you're depressed and anxious. You're right to be depressed and anxious. You're being treated really badly. You're really lonely, for example. But he'd been taught at medical school, even though he actually knew the science was much more sophisticated, to say to people, oh, you've just got a chemical imbalance, we'll just drug you. Like me, he's not against the drugs, but he just thought, this is not enough. So he tried an experiment. Sam, I'll give you an example of one of his patients, a woman called Lisa Cunningham came to see him, who I got to know. Lisa had been shut away in her home, crippled with depression and anxiety for seven years. And Lisa came to see Sam, and he said to her, I'll carry on giving you the drugs, don't worry, but I'm going to prescribe you something else. I'm going to prescribe for you to take part in a group. There was an area behind the doctor's surgery that was just kind of scrubland. He said, we're going to support you. I want you to come a couple of times a week and meet with other people here, other depressed and anxious people, and I want you just to turn this into something beautiful. Lisa was physically sick with anxiety when she turned up to that first one. As time went on, as the weeks and months went by, they taught themselves gardening. They had got their fingers in the soil. They had something to talk about that wasn't how bad they felt. As human beings do when they get together in groups, they started to solve each other's problems. You know, one of the people on the group was sleeping on the bus. Everyone else, the public bus, everyone else was outraged. They started lobbying the local authorities to get him an apartment, which succeeded. They'd done something for someone else, which made them feel great. As Lisa put it to me, as the flowers began to bloom, we began to bloom. There was a study in Norway that found this approach, which is called social prescribing, is more than twice as effective as chemical antidepressants. I think because it's dealing with one of the deep underlying reasons why people feel so bad. If you have a human society that is, you know, increasingly socially isolated, where people are cut off and told to think of themselves just as economic maximizers, where people are constantly being told that life is about money and status, which there's very strong proof makes you depressed, where people are made to just think life is about screaming at each other through screens. And then you tell people the reason you feel bad is just because you're biologically broken. That is going to create an environment where, well, we've been doing it for 30 years and we can see the results. Every year we've done it, depression and anxiety have risen. And if we carry on with this approach, it will carry on rising. This is not some wacky view from me.
Right.
It's just the position of the World Health Organization, right? World Health Organization explained in 2011, mental health is produced socially. It is a social indicator above all else. It requires social solutions as well as individual solutions. The United Nations, in their official statement last year for World Health Day, said we needed to talk less about chemical imbalances, more about power imbalances, the kind of thing that you cover every day.
Sure, yeah. And there's no question that many of the elements of Western modern society that have become sort of status quo and sort of the unquestionable elements of it are definitely connected to a lot of what it is that we're identifying. We've been speaking with Johann Hari. He's author of the book Lost Connections, Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and the Unexpected Solutions. Johann, thanks so much for talking to us about this today.
Thanks so much, David. I should just say as well, anyone who wants any more information, if they want to find out what Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Hillary Clinton, Elton John have said about the book, they can go to www.thelostconnections.com. They can hear audio with loads of the scientists we've been talking about, and they can take a quiz to see how much they know about the real causes of depression and anxiety. And David, thank you for all the work you do every day. It's so important and exciting.
Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
It just so happens that the Republican National Committee's finance chair, up until very recently, is casino mogul Steve Wynn. And Steve Wynn is now facing accusations of decades of sexual misconduct, and he has since resigned his position as finance chair of the RNC. And one of the allegations against him is that he forced a woman to have sex with him in 2005. Now, I call that rape. Like when you force someone to have sex with you, I think that's what we call rape. And this generally was his MO. He reportedly for a long time has been pressuring employees to have sex with him. He's committed allegedly endless numbers of acts of sexual misconduct. One of the women involved was a manicurist who reached a $7.5 million settlement with Wynn after he forced her to have sex with him, which I believe means he raped her. Steve Wynn isn't admitting anything. He says these are all stories concocted or fueled by his ex-wife, Elaine Wynn, who he's in a nasty divorce proceeding with. And in their investigation, the Wall Street Journal contacted 150 people. And a lot of those people said when we were working at one of his facilities, when we knew he was on his way to where we were, we would actually hide. Is it that hard not to sexually harass or assault women? Like I've somehow gotten through my life without even like a close call of sexual harassment. Apparently for some people, it's really, really tough. And I actually have plenty of Steve Wynn stories. The conference that I go to in Las Vegas twice a year, one of those times each year, it's held at the Wynn. And I've bumped into Steve Wynn a bunch of times. And once he and a woman he was with and a couple other people sat down right next to me and Sam Cedar.
Wow.
And some other progressive media people at a restaurant at the Wynn Hotel. And he was, of course, with a woman who seems much, much younger than he is. She didn't seem particularly thrilled to be there, but it wasn't super well lit. So maybe I was just misreading her facial expression. His bodyguard sat at the next table over. And I can't imagine there's really that much. Like, he's not even that recognizable, even in his own hotel, by his staff, obviously. But his bodyguards go with him. They sit at the next table over and have themselves a nice steak dinner. And
if you and other progressive hosts were at a table right next to him, I think the bodyguards are right to be there right next to him.
Oh, yeah, they should be concerned. If Sam Cedar all of a sudden is sidling up next to Steve Wynn, and once I was almost knocked down by his bodyguards, actually, later on in the evening, we were hanging out in the casino area, and all of a sudden, Scott Millican, producer extraordinaire of Ring of Fire, he grabs me by the elbow and pulls me out of the way, and I'm just unclear, or I have no idea what's going on. And as that's happening, Wynn's bodyguards are just like moving people out of the way because Steve Wynn was walking through. So it was either get pulled out of the way by Scott Millican of Ring of Fire, or potentially get trampled by Steve Wynn's bodyguards at the Wynn. And that would have made for an interesting story, but it would not probably have been super fun.
They're like Moses parting the seas, it seems.
They were, yeah. I mean, basically, I think that's how he thinks of himself, like the equivalent of the Red Sea parts when he walks around his own casinos anyway. So yeah, he's gone now after allegations of decades of sexual assault. What do you think? Sad? Should we be happy about that?
Well,
inconsequential?
The next chapter of the Me Too movement, I guess. It's hitting politics. It's hitting entertainment.
It's hitting the casino world. Yeah. Steve Wynn, I don't even know what to say as a send-off, but he will no longer be the RNC finance chair. Back on January 16th, we did this story about a male sex robot that was called to my attention that sort of looks like me. And after we ran that story, I got an email from a viewer named Ken who said, that story you did with the male sex doll that looks like you gave me an idea as to what a future Patreon goal should be. You should purchase the sex doll, and at a Patreon goal of your choosing, whether it be $3,500 or whatever, you do an entire show with the doll dressed in a suit and sitting in your chair. You would be off camera lending your voice to discuss the stories as usual, but it would be the doll in place of where you usually sit. I think it would be kind of funny, especially when you start talking to Pat and he has to respond to an inanimate doll. Just a thought. Thanks, and keep up the great work. This is actually a hilarious idea. We make a Patreon goal, like 5,000 patrons.
Yeah.
And when we hit that, we buy the sex doll that looks like me, put my clothes on it, and have it sit here, and it's here motionless, and I do an entire show from off camera just with a microphone. And maybe it's even funnier if we never talk about it. We never explain it in any way.
I'm always on board for these ideas. I like it.
The only problem is that I went to the website for Realbotics, who manufactures this thing, and there's not even a way to pre-order one right now.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. So then what I did is I went to the Real Doll website to check prices. They seem to cost between $6,000 and $9,000 roughly, although they don't have one that looks like me. So what I thought might be possible, and again, I'm just kind of spitballing ideas here, some of these Real Doll type manufacturers, they will make it look like whoever you want. So instead of going with the Realbotics one, which just seems to look like me by chance, we could actually have one made custom.
Yeah.
That really looks like me.
They're going to think that you're a narcissist, though.
Yes, I know. Yeah. But anyway, listen, if the audience doesn't like this, and it's possible that they won't, I apologize. Let's never speak of it again, whatever. But if we can get to 5,000 patrons, it would certainly make sense financially to invest 6,000 to 9,000 in a doll.
But if we do buy this, I think we're stuck with it because I don't know what the resale value is of a sex
zero.
doll, but I have to imagine it's zero.
We'd have to pay someone to take it. Although it's possible we might be able to maybe raffle it off to the audience or include it in some kind of
there's high demand for that.
Yeah, it's possible that someone in the audience, if you listen to our voicemail each day, you'd probably come away thinking that there are people in the audience who would be interested in a David Pakman real doll, sex doll thing or something like that. Anyway, send me your thoughts. And I know it's a little silly, but we're always looking for unique and interesting things. I don't think you're going to tune into InfoWars and see an Alex Jones real doll sitting there.
This is unique and interesting.
For better or worse, you're not going to see that there. So let me know what your thoughts are and we can go from there. Okay, here is an update to the Brett Keane story. So to catch you up, if you're not aware of what's been going on, we have been receiving a series of voicemails at our voicemail number, which is 2192-DAVID-P, from someone who just spouts religious dogma and interpretations of religious texts and little bits of religious texts. And after we played a couple of this guy's voicemails, several people wrote in saying, David, that sounds like Brett Keane.
Yep.
Now, I had no idea who Brett Keane was, but Pat explained to me that Brett Keane is a former atheist turned Christian.
He used to be one of the biggest atheists on YouTube.
Okay.
And then eventually he became a Christian. He got kicked off of YouTube multiple times.
Okay.
And then he was like the chief antagonist on the Drunken Peasants show.
Right, which is the now defunct Drunken Peasants show.
Unfortunately, yeah.
I went to the Brett Keane YouTube channel, and the voice did sound similar, but the confusion was that Brett Keane, I guess, is in his early 40s.
41, I think.
And the caller said that he's 54 years old. And even though Brett Keane to me looks like he's in his mid-50s, Pat assured me that he's not. So anyway, we speculated the other day, is the religious caller Brett Keane? The real Brett Keane has now called into the show. He recorded himself calling in and leaving the voicemail, and that recording is way better than the voicemail he left us, which is all garbled and staticky. And I think it is abundantly clear that it was not actually Brett Keane who called in before. This is Brett Keane calling in to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show
is not available. Please leave a message after the tone.
Hello, my name is Brett Keane from GodTVRadio.com. Make sure that you connect with me on Facebook and Twitter.
Plug.
And when you get a chance, check out my articles and also some of my new t-shirt designs. You're going to love them.
Plug it.
Remember, my YouTube channel is Brett Keane, God TV Radio. Very easy to remember.
Yeah.
And by the way, I noticed that you thought that I was like 57 years old or 60. Don't let the premature gray hair fool you. My wife calls me the gray fox for a reason. Have a good day, Mr. Pac-Man.
Yes.
Oh, by the way, my phone number is 636. Call me back, baby cakes.
Oh, okay, yeah. We cut out the rest of his voicemail, the rest of his phone number.
I don't know why he doxed himself.
I know, yeah. I was not going to air that part of it. I wonder why he wants to talk to me. But anyway, are we ready to say that the religious caller is definitely not Brett Keane?
Oh yeah, I was ready to say that last week.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Pretty much.
Well, now I've come around and I'm ready to say it as well.
But I think he likes you.
It seems like he does kind of like the whole thing, yeah.
Yeah, he gave you a smooch.
Anyway, thanks for calling in. The real Brett Keane. We don't know who the other dude is, and we may never. On the bonus show today, the Senate has rejected a measure to ban abortion after 20 weeks of pregnancy. There is a California lawmaker who is taking some flack over a plastic straw bill. And I actually have some strong feelings about plastic versus paper straws. I had a horrible incident, horrible incident involving paper straws over the weekend. Oh, and no. I will talk about that. It's not what you think. It's not like perverted. Pat's already thinking, oh God. I will talk about that on the bonus show. And also, we will talk about Joe Kennedy III, who is going to be doing the rebuttal to Trump's State of the Union address tonight. Tomorrow, we will talk about Donald Trump's first official State of the Union address. Get access to the bonus show one of two ways. Become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show, or become a member at davidpakman.com/member.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.